Friends, and I'm not a professional interviewer. Just put a disclaimer right in the front. And I am more of a writer, and I discuss with my friends so that you get what you have to hear. And so this video I'm going to put on Americans for Hindus channel as well, and on Sattology as well. My questions today, this expert, you already know him, and I already yesterday tweeted I'm going to speak with this gentleman. And he's a good friend, amazing person, excellent clarity on all issues that he's concerned with. And his videos you have liked a lot. So without delay, introducing to you Abhijit Iyer Mitradi.
Har Har Mahadev.
And he's joining from India, Har Har Mahadev. And he is a person that if you meet him, you can't just you can't stop yourself being impressed. At young age, he has done few people just dream of. So Abhijit, we are living in we're going through Corona, and Corona has some people initially thought, I don't want to make crude jokes there because it's been a very bad time for many New Yorkers, and some of my friends have lost their loved ones. So I won't speak on that, but my friends know that I make jokes on everything, including myself the most. So without delay, how do you see, Abhijit, that how the economic world will look like post-corona? Because you are a visionary, you're a strategic thinker.
I don't know about that, but I just listen to lots of other intelligent people and collate stuff. But look, for me, I think the main thing about this is to look at the historical precedent. And technically, if you look at it, through every single plague and epidemic that we've been through in the past, life just went on as normal, but the economy always got affected. In some cases, when there was a war happening simultaneously, nothing really happened. But in other cases, life just goes on. So I don't see the post-COVID environment to be particularly different. I think all the natural geopolitics will come back into play. Democrats will keep blaming Russia for Trump winning the next election, or they might switch to China, for example. Though I think too many of them are in the pockets of the Chinese to actually accuse China. China is already playing games. You saw they were conducting military exercises and very aggressive maneuvers in the South China Sea. They're continuing to send nuclear shipments to Pakistan, so nothing's changed out there. They've used this entire system to make all kinds of, to make a killing, really. You look at it, now Dr. Tedros has deleted his tweet, but he actually had a tweet as early as about 10, 12 days back where he was saying, don't wear face masks unless you're sick. And on the 8th of April, sometime last week, slightly before last week, the WHO put out an advisory this late saying, don't trust rapid testing kits. This was all done after everyone in the world had already purchased Chinese rapid testing kits. They had already purchased Chinese masks, which China had first purchased from them. So, there's, I think the biggest casualty of all of this is going to be Dr. Tedros. He'll be made, I won't call him a scapegoat. He is a criminal who's responsible for much of this. But he will basically be scapegoated for all the negatives. And, the issue is, America is still very, very deeply enmeshed with China economically. So I don't see what all they can do to really hurt the Chinese in that sense. We'll just see the world go back to normal. What I do see is, though, there is going to be a severe economic slump. Especially, I think it's going to be particularly bad in India because, what's happening is, unlike Canada, America, and the UK and all those other countries which are putting money into businesses, India is starting up public works programs. Now, as we know from the New Deal, that was the one part of the New Deal that didn't actually work. It was the Second World War that started off the demand for production, the war demand. And it was the social security networks that, provided the propensity to purchase during the Great Depression. What little they could purchase in that sense. So, I think India in particular, its economic mismanagement is going to magnify geometrically. But I also think Modi is going to get a scapegoat. He's going to say, well, everything was going fine had it not been for COVID. I don't personally think that explanation will go down very well, but look, he's definitely going to try that stunt.
No, absolutely, you are right. The jobless numbers in US have totally spiked, and I don't want to quote them because everyone can search them out on the internet. But it's almost gone up 25 to 30%. And the first stimulus that the US launched through their small business administration was spent within 3 days or 4 days. And that is $250 billion worth of cash, just people took it. Now they're also struggling, but I'm sure the US has a smaller population base to cover as compared to India. One question I have, so we have seen in this world that communism has gone away right in front of our eyes, 91. And our generation has also seen that capitalism has not been able to fulfill everybody. In the US, we have 30% of the population, 30% of the population living below the poverty standards of the US. And poverty standards are unique to every nation as per their economy. So capitalism has gone, socialism has gone, communism has gone. So the only thing remains is the Arthashastra. So do you think that India has ever made a good usage of their knowledge bank?
But see, I would completely disagree with the fact that communism and socialism have gone. I just say they've reinvented themselves, and what you call the left today, be it Democrats in the US, be it though the Democrats are a lot more pragmatic, but you do have the communist fringe, a very powerful communist fringe within the Democrats. And let's be clear, they are communists,
Right.
nothing else.
Absolutely. And
Labor has
socialist.
become, and well, I mean, socialism is just, I mean, what? It's kind of semi goalpost shifting with communism.
Yes.
Socialists,
Yes.
once they come to power, turn communist.
Yes.
Uh, uh, the way I understand it is communism is socialism plus concentration camps. Anyway, so Labour is completely communist. You see all these left-wing parties coming up. But I also don't see capitalism having gone anywhere. If we go back to the Arthashastra is the original textbook of capitalism. The
Absolutely.
state had absolutely, Chanakya was opposed to the king or anyone or the government interfering in the lives of people. The only thing was maintenance of law and order, providing a good judiciary, providing good regulatory policy, and that was it. Because look, at the fundamental level, a government is a kleptocracy, right? It's taking away money from people and it's providing services minus a commission to keep itself up. It's very beneficial. That's a different matter. I think if you read historians like Ian Morris and things, you realize how both war and government, and counterintuitively, I mean, you think of government as being a good thing, but not war necessarily being a good thing. But every good thing in this world has actually come out of war. So, I don't see capitalism or communism having gone anywhere. They've just shifted and changed forms. They've changed their the shells which they present to the outside world. India's role, no, I don't see any Indian role in the next 150 years at least. Because remember, to project your own narrative, you first need to have a strong national narrative. If you project it as a Hindu narrative, what base do the Hindus have? You have to provide people with a success story, the China model or the American dream, so to say, to push your own stories. Now, how do you push something like the Arthashastra when your own government and your own prime minister don't listen to it? I personally think the Arthashastra is the gold standard. It's the original book of the Austrian School of Economics, I personally
Absolutely.
believe.
Absolutely.
But when your own prime minister doesn't believe that, second, you look at the caliber of academics that come out of India. Their only real worth is schmoozing, networking, academically zero. Okay. Even though they're viewed very highly, anybody who's lived in India can tell you that, anybody who talks authoritatively about India that authoritatively that these people do is basically kidding themselves, because there's no one India. The reality is political, economic, they change every 100, 150 kilometers. So, you don't have a narrative to sell, and the people in charge of selling it are either uncooperative, and the ones who are cooperative are usually third raters. So how are you going to sell it? I don't see that happening in my lifetime.
So one aspect, I have been working a lot with many prominent people here. I'm challenging the non-Hindus leading the Hindu studies department in the US, where people are practicing. I have nothing against other faiths, but I want, when it comes to Sanatan Dharma, Hinduism, I want Hindus in tradition to teach it, because they can be the best judge of the philosophy. Now, coming to the economics also, most of the economic, like you correctly said, that Arthashastra is the world's first capitalistic system, which is based on actions more than the emotional side of it. Now, the politics of taxation is going to play a big role in the revival, I think, post-Corona world.
Yeah.
And the Arthashastra's taxation policies are so lenient that it helps everyone, including the state. So, and you correctly said that the Indian leaders are not willing to hear that. Now, what is that can be done by people like you, who are an influential voice, who is an influential voice in India, can do to bring home the point that the solution is still so rest all the other experiments have collapsed to some extent. The spend economy has collapsed, the productive economy has collapsed. Now the thing which is left is something, a balance, which only a Arthashastra or a fundamental economic principle can do. What can you do to make a change over there, because you have a voice over there in India?
Look, I've been doing the best I can do, which is railing at against the government from a Hindutva point of view. And if they're not even going to listen to that, well, then, I mean, what's with these socialist policies? They are not willing to listen. And if somebody is not willing to listen, there's nothing you can literally do. Unfortunately, that's a sad reality of things, right? You look at the taxation policies, it was one flat rate. It was something like about 15-16% approximately, which is approximately what you pay in India even today. Except the wasteful expenditure of the government is enormous, right? The kind of regulatory unpredictability, regulations changing every 6 months, 3 months, sometimes a year, 2 years. The kind of GST, why 2 slabs? Initially, it was meant to be 4 slabs. Now they're planning on bringing it down to 2 slabs. Why? I mean, everybody could, demonetization, we didn't see it coming, but GST, everybody was saying, 4 slabs is bad because this is just enabling the lower level bureaucracy to use it as a tool of extortion. Nothing was done about it. What do you do when the government is immune to listening to just common sense? You don't need to have a PhD to give economic advice, right? But I know a lot of PhDs in economics in the government who don't even know basic economics, don't even know the basics of demand and supply. They know they've cleared a UPSC exam. So they all know all the theoretical answers, but the practical application simply isn't there. And in many ways, my thing has always been, I think I've said this on your program before, learn carrots and sticks from dog training. Everybody should have a dog. They should go to a German dog training school and learn dog training. Margaret Thatcher had a slightly different strategy. She used to say, whatever I learned from my mom and dad at home, because it was basic good lessons of home economics that she applied on a national level. And, everybody bitches about Margaret Thatcher because it's so fashionable to be socialist. She took a country that was in the absolute dumps, that was going nowhere, whose economy was collapsing, and she overnight turned it into a financial superpower. In that sense, she was single-handedly revived that country. That they're ungrateful for it is a different matter. But, I don't see that happening out here, because if you're going to have generalists, if you're not going to listen to proper advice, if you're not even going to apply common sense, there's nothing you can realistically do.
Absolutely. Now, I touched upon taxation, and there is one saying that we are saying in the US a lot nowadays is that we are neither left nor right. We are dharmic, because that's a platform of righteousness. Now in the post-corona world, many things I think are coming in now in a big way, especially in the US. Yesterday, California passed a law that the masks may be in for rest until 2021, and remote working is preferred over physical presence in the offices. So the real estate industry is going to go really down because people are going to cut down their physical premises. And I have seen that whatever US does today, generally India does it after 10 years.
Hmm.
So when the US says today globalization is dead, and you hear Indian leaders talking about globalization, and I'm sure in 10 years they will come to the point where they say globalization is dead, and by that time the US will say multilateralism is out, and probably in 10 years the United Nations will be gone. So why there is a lack of such strategic economic vision in India today?
Look, very simple. One starts off at the data collation level. We don't have accurate data collation. You look even at government figures, even basics like TB deaths. We don't provide TB death figures. We depend on international estimates, which estimate around 2 to 400,000 people die of TB in India every year. Imagine 200 to 400,000 people every year. If that hasn't resulted in a shutdown of your economy, why is COVID resulting in a shutdown of your economy, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm making a bit of a facetious comparison, but still, uh, where is the data? One of the things that India researchers always struggle with is hard economic data. A high, so if you, and that is one pillar you simply cannot avoid in policy making. The problem is if you actually have hard economic data, it busts the chop shop that all these bureaucrats and crony capitalists run, because that is when all uh, their dhanda, so to say, stops. Start off with that. Even when that is missing, then what happens is you have policies based on assumptions. You don't have proper thought given to first order of effect, second order of effect, third order of effect. There is no planning or gaming of alternatives. I've seen this with defense policy. I've barely seen it, but from what little I've seen of financial policy, I can see it's not very different, right? So what happens with defense policy is there's this belief that the enemy will only do what you want it to do. We will do this, and this has to be how they react. And guess what? The enemy never reacts the way you want them to react, right? That's not how you game second and third order policy effects. It requires a brutal introspection. It requires constant gaming of the system to see how the effects, cause and effect, work out. We don't do any of that. Let me give you a personal example of what that leads to. When I was working in the US at a place called Sandia National Laboratories in Albuquerque, New Mexico, it took me just 1 week to get to know the terrain, to feel safe driving from where I was staying to the office, getting to know everybody, where to get the printouts, what to do for lunch, and so on and so forth. And once I had done that, uh, you know, 8 hours a day was just sheer productivity. It was just good, hard, productive, solid research, talking to people with extraordinary technical expertise, putting together a fantastic paper on the technical elements of certain things. In India, in every workplace I've been, 99% of my time gets taken up in failure management, failure compensation for everybody else. I'm left, maybe, if at all, that too I have to come early at 7 a.m. in the morning, and from 7 to 8 a.m. then I do my work. The problem is when people see you're coming early, they also start coming early and piling their problems onto you earlier and earlier. And I'm not willing to go to office at 4 a.m. in the morning. So I've noticed even the quality of my own work ever since I returned from Australia, it's come down quite significantly. So, the thing here is when you don't have data, when you don't have good experts, when you don't have good managers, you're stuck in a system like that. You're perpetually failure compensating, you're firefighting. You don't have time to, uh, you know, um, take a deep breath, rise above all of it, above Maya Jal, if you want to call it that, and take a macro view. You just get bogged down in the micro, micro, micro. And this is a PMO that actually enjoys getting bogged down in the micro. They think micromanagement is the name of the game. So best of luck to them, but
So
it
one
doesn't
thing I
work.
have, yeah, one thing I have seen, and since I just little better understanding of how the Western economies work, they try to bend situations around the world towards their economic advantage, and and that's their part of the foreign policy. That's part of their economic policy, and that's how they have been successful in building deals in their favor over the last 100 years. Now, India being a large country and large democratic country, which most of the Western countries they claim to love, and I'm saying claim to love with quotes, but it's a very attractive market. Why is that India has not developed that spine despite being the home of Arthashastra, the economic treatise, which on which Germans economy is based on, and Americans have copied from that. The philosophy has come from India, and India doesn't have the spine to stand up to all interference. Like very easily, somebody from Chicago, without taking the name, you can all guess it. There's somebody from Chicago which has no idea about macroeconomics, lands up in India and dictates the term. And no one from India, despite being the rich talent pool they have, and is able to stand up. Why is that they buckle so soon?
So, look, I would disagree with a lot of those assumptions because remember, what the end product may look a lot like the Arthashastra, but they certainly didn't get it from India in
Mm,
that sense, right? They developed it based on economic realities happening out there. So, you look, for example, at, uh, you know, so one thing I look at is military economics. And, one of the most important lessons you learn is the Dresser pin rifle, which was responsible for the Prussian victory in the Prussian Franco-Prussian War
correct. Yeah.
under Bismarck, von Moltke actually. The Germans, they realized government factories couldn't produce it. They gave it to private companies, and after that, they never looked back. There was this clear correlation between performance and reward,
Mm,
and they institutionalized in that system. And from there on, even for a system, the Nazi party, which was National Socialist, all the production was done by private companies. It was
mm,
outsourced to private companies. The designs were outsourced. The government didn't get involved in all of that. Today's Germany is somewhat more socialistic than, say, Nazi Germany. And I don't mean this as a derogatory thing. It's a pendulumic thing. At some point, you do need some level of wealth distribution to happen. Otherwise, you have too much social churn happening, right? That's number one. But number two, you look at it that why are we not adopting these same systems? Why is it that we keep doubling down on our failures? Why is it that we've seen that this economic system hasn't worked over the last 70 years? This was the same man who said minimum government, maximum governance, and
mm.
yet he's doubling down on government. Where is all the privatization happening? You see, so it's just not happening in India. We can say, for example, we can say that the zero is an Indian concept in the current usage it is. But remember, the Mayas discovered zero about 200 years before we did, completely independently, unrelated to us. Um, it's things like this, I fret sometimes when I look at the future of our country. I fret.
No, you touched many things, and I know your expertise in the defense side, strategic defense side. And one of the programs, so I was talking to somebody the other day. The US is moving to Sikorsky 97, and which is the next generation of S-90. and probably in next 5 to 10 years, you'll see MH90 and all these being phased out towards Sikorsky 97. And it has a much faster plane, and it's a new way, like it almost flies at 300 miles an hour speed. Now, if you look at that, and India is still struggling with HAL, and which is Bell 206 standard 1945 technology, and they're still proud of that. It's like celebrating mediocrity. So that, and when you talk about Tejas, and you know, I take pride in whatever they do in Tejas and everything, but still it's a pretty old design, and it has not seen the market yet, despite being
Yeah.
30 years of development. What do you think is the reason for that? Is it like a lack of program management, lack of project management, or everything combined?
Look, it's a system of systems failure. It's failed from beginning to end. It was stillborn in conception. Uh, Tell me something. You're fundamentally a pre-industrial economy. You never industrialized. The crux of a modern aircraft is subsystems, right? Uh, which is all manufactured by micro, medium, and small enterprises. Instead of energizing them, what do? You make DRDO and HAL set up their own segments for everything. There is no economies of scale. There is no expertise out there. You can't get everybody to produce top-notch stuff at government salaries. When the same guy, when he's really good, he can get about 15, 20 lakhs a month outside. Why is he going to work for 1.2 lakhs at a government company? You tell me one reason why he should. This is why most of my friends who did defense startups in India, they never got orders in India. They all moved to Silicon Valley and to places like Georgia and Texas, set up companies out there. They're now selling to the American military. Fantastic, cutting edge stuff. Same story as Bose speakers. Why didn't Dr. Amar Gopal Bose do Bose speakers in India? Why did he set up, he asked for a license to manufacture it. Indira Gandhi rejected it. And he went off to America, and now everybody wants Bose speakers across the world. I don't like Bose speakers. I don't think they're very good speakers. That's a different matter, right? But still, why did he have to go off to America to do all of this? Again, I don't think they're settling for the S97. I think they're going for the Bell V280, the tilt-rotor aircraft. But look, they've gone tilt-rotor. Even the S97, it's quite a revolutionary design in the sense of, the coaxial rotors. Two rotors, one above the other. And we already had that technology from Kamov. It's actually Russian Kamov technology. Just like the F-35's jump jet was originally also Russian technology. It was technology bought from Russia, from the Soviet Union. From Russia, but it was Soviet technology. Why weren't we the ones making the S97? Why didn't we ever get license manufacture for coaxial rotors to do all of this? You've had a fighter and a tank in development for almost 40 years, and they're still failing miserably. You have a paid media cabal that will still tell you they're relevant, and I can tell you right off the board, they are completely irrelevant. That fighter and that tank, when they come on board, they're going to be sitting ducks. They're going to be shot out of the air and shot out of the ground like geese. You have Pakistan, whose fighter is more successful than your fighter. It has now got export success. Why? Because unko apni aukat pata hai. They knew what to do. They were only interested in assembly. They weren't interested in creating a fake ecosystem of government companies that won't perform. The only thing the LCA and Arjun have been good for has been for government employment. And like we all know, government employment does not produce results. It's that simple. It's just jobs for the boys. There is no accountability. There is no sacking if you get it wrong. So how did Pakistan succeed where India failed? I mean, Pakistan hasn't even gone through the economic churn. At least we had some kind of land reforms. It wasn't really land reforms. It was tenancy reforms, but it did break large-scale feudal power, not small-scale feudal power. You want classic example of a feudal lord? It's Sharad Pawar. He owns more land than anybody else in India. despite the Land Ceiling Act and all of that. But it's held in different corporate guises and ruses and under different names or whatever. So Pakistan is much more feudal than you are, yet they are able to get this fighter from China that they've had a lot of input in developing, highly successful fighter that's being exported to 3-4 different countries. You haven't even been able to get your first fighter operational, even though your fighter started up before the Pakistani fighter did. Okay. How is this even logical? How is it that China, whose only manufacturing was of the MiG-19, okay, which was one generation behind your MiG-21, whereas India was manufacturing the MiG-21, today China has gone on to stealth aircraft. You aren't even able to manufacture a successor to the MiG-21. The JF-17 today, if you look at it, it's a clear derivative of the MiG-21. Okay, of the MiG-19 technically. They modified lots of things. They had a few MiG-21s. They made modifications. It wasn't as good as the Russian MiG-21. So our MiG-21s were always better than Chinese MiG-21s. They did all kinds of modifications to it, and finally they got to where they are today. And Pakistan is getting there. Today, you know, Pakistani JF-17s are more advanced than Chinese JF-17s because they get the shell from China and they put in Italian avionics, Italian missiles and things, well, Chinese missiles still, but they're going to get Italian missiles from them, Western radars and all of that for it, which makes it a far, far superior product. So see, this is what I mean. We can go sector by sector by sector, but you know, you shouldn't depress your viewers, because I can show you how virtually every sector in this entire country is woefully mismanaged. And in the last 6 years, despite all the speeches, absolutely nothing has been done to reform any of these sectors. Not agriculture, not human resource development, not defense, not finance, not fiscal policy, not regulatory policy. Tax terrorism continues, regulatory terrorism continues. Every year there's some new cess, some new this, some new that. Why? I mean, you know, if you have to adjust fiscal policy that often, every 3 to 6 months, if your RBI, in a country like this where things aren't starting off, tell me, is a 7% interest rate even sustainable?
Yeah,
it needs to be down to about less than 1% in order to stimulate lending so that people can set up capital. In a country like this, do you think land prices can be sustained at this height, at this high a rate? Because, you know, land is a completely inutile fact. There's no returns on land. You know, when Ricardo came up with his theory of rent, you know, the original powers of land, complete nonsense. There is no, in agriculture, it makes sense. You know, more fertile land should be more expensive. But in industry, it's only proximity to the port or proximity to your supplier that counts. And that too, you can solve those issues through infrastructure. In a third world country, for land prices to be this high, okay, and this is where, see, I move towards socialism, which is basically pragmatism, which is you demonetize land. You know, you price land based on yield and you give it out based on whoever's come up with a business solution so that you incentivize business. There's nothing being done. See, even socialism sometimes can be intelligently implemented. I am not an ideologue in that sense, right? As much as I admire Chanakya, that was a pre-industrial, early Iron Age economy. We are today in a much, much more complex economy where the smartest thing is to mix and match. You take a little bit from here, you take a little bit from there, and you combine it, and you see what produces results. Why should you be ideological about this? Yeah. You know, like Cardinal Richelieu used to say, I don't have any, I don't know about you, my dear man, but I have no pride. So I personally have no pride when it comes to, I'll keep abusing communists and socialists all day, but if I find they come up with a good idea, I'll still continue abusing them, but I'll steal their ideas and implement it, right? So, and this is in a sense what China did, the demonetization of land and valuing it based on yield. And of course, China went too far in the building boom, which is now completely unsustainable and all of that. That's a different matter. But see, you take examples that work and mix and match. Here, what has the government done in the last 6 years? Let me give you another example. Agriculture. In 2011, I've tweeted it out somewhere. You go look at the registrar's figures. The total number of agriculturalists and agricultural labor in India was 21%. And they accounted for 11 to 12% of GDP. Okay? Still, it shows you the level of unproductivity. Do you know, so the percentage of GDP of agriculture today is 18%. Okay, mostly because of how badly industry has been affected. But do you know the percentage of agricultural workers, total agriculturalists plus agricultural workers? It's somewhere between 47 to 51%.
Wow.
Do you know what that is? That's hidden unemployment. You've basically buried a 30% spike in employment in a country like India. Imagine how many hundreds of millions of people we're talking about with MNREGA and things like that. Okay. So, I mean, I'm just not seeing this government working for anyone. It's not working for the bania. It's not working for the big industrialist. It's handing out money to the poor, but whose money is it handing it out to the poor? You know, if you keep suppressing business, there's not going to be any money to hand out anyway. You know, this kind of social spending is completely unsustainable.
See, just like when the economy warms up and there is some kind of inflation, similarly, when the business grows, there is bound to be some kind of corruption, because that's the nature of the business, and it's a byproduct of a healthy economy. So in other countries, especially in Western countries, corruption is legalized through the lobbying agents and other things. It's legalized, and so it's also an economy. It's no longer corruption is not a bad thing. It's an economy. So if you want to do something, you hire a lobbyist. Now, coming back to the agricultural points you made, and agriculture is one of my best subjects here. And Arthashastra, or everyone focus on agriculture a lot. The protection of the farmer is the foremost interest of the government, one of the foremost, because they are the people who put bread on people's tables. What I have noticed is the US has 6 million farmers. Out of 350 million, there are 6 million farmers, but they're producing food for not only 300 million people, 350 million people, but for the whole world. And so naturally, technology has played a big role in filling their bread basket. So India being as a percentage of the land, India has a much bigger percentage of fertile land. And even as compared to USA only Indiana and few states have good land, including California, some parts of California, most of it is desert.
But look, I mean, India, along with Ukraine and Poland, have the highest percentage of arable land in the world, 48 to 52%, depending on this thing. Yet, what are we seeing? Falling yields, terrible productivity. 30 to 40% of your crop just rots in the fields because you don't have last mile connectivity. Your irrigation system is out of sync. You keep coming up with these loan waiver schemes that do nothing to improve your agriculture. You're sustaining, you're not even providing industrial jobs for these people to move. They're stuck in a debt trap. Remember, American agriculture is based on large farms that are viable economically. Where the Soviet Union failed was that it did not make those farms economically viable. It was based on ideology, not on economic viability. On the other hand, you look at the classic mix of capitalism and socialism in Israel, right? You have kibbutzim, which were based on that Soviet collective model, albeit not forced like the Soviet collective model. It was entirely voluntary. Who have all, today the kibbutz, the original kibbutzim, they are all the kibbutzniks, if you want to call them that. They are the shareholders. The lands of the kibbutz are managed by corporate entities, which then share the profits out amongst the kibbutzniks. Okay. So there are ways of doing this. You know, simple thing, you waste so much of your water in evaporation and transit and things like that. You can't solve that problem, and now you come up with an ecological disaster scheme, which is called the linking of rivers. I don't know which idiot thought that up, but all the modern literature on rivers tells you that a river is an ecosystem. It isn't something to just plunder. So anybody who talks about linking up rivers, remind them about the ecological protection aspects, which are also spoken about in the Arthashastra. Because there's a huge emphasis on protecting forests and natural reserves and things like that out there, with very good reason. 52%, 48 to 52% of your so-called arable land is so lacking in nitrogen. It is so lacking in, we have forgotten all our traditional practices, and we don't have the modern equipment to compensate. So instead of putting the right amount of water, which is what Israel does, that is your drip irrigation technology, there is this belief that the more water you put, the better it yields, and it does not. What it does is that when you reduce the forest cover, it just washes away all the nutrients and things like that. Okay. Agricultural policy, again, a huge this thing. You have agricultural stores in this country that are just rotting. Your grain silos are completely useless. The Chinese offered to sell us a system to track grain and its supply, to track agricultural supplies. We said we didn't want it. Do you know why? Because the people who were all the babus in the agricultural manufacturing system, who knew that the moment this thing happens, they lose all their, what do you call it, their profits that they were making on the side. Okay, so look, there have been absolutely no systemic changes. There is this belief that somehow the systems were okay. It was just the people that were bad, but then you haven't even replaced the people. So if prior to 2014, if all the systems were good, and you haven't felt the need to replace any of the people in charge of it, what exactly were you elected for in 2014? What was wrong then?
True. And you made some very good points here. One last point, and before we move off, now the role of we usually see that the foreign international banks like IMF and World Bank, they are taken very seriously in India, when in fact India is a continent in itself with 1.3 billion people. And why is that? They've still not come out of that colonial mindset that they need to hear an endorsement from someone else. Why can't they do it inside?
Look, this is this fundamental inferiority complex, right? And there's nothing you can do to solve an inferiority complex. That said, I have to say that some of the IMF and World Bank policies have been much more sound than Indian government policies, right? They were always, you look at all their policies, there's a reason they used to link up. See, very you can start off with the best intentions, but in the process of negotiation, the tangibility of a policy, how it's connected up to the parallels and verticals, gets eroded in the negotiation process. IMF and World Bank always used to insist on certain other structural changes being made, because policy can't be made in silos. It's linked up to macro policy in general. We never even used to listen to that. Okay, fine. World Bank and IMF have got it horribly wrong every now and then. But let's also talk about where they got it right. Right? They got it right in several instances. They also got it badly wrong. Like the Asian financial crisis was one of those things that they got horribly, horribly wrong. But remember, the Bretton Woods institutions, Europe was built because of them. Right? And that is no mean achievement. Today, Europe's living standards are far, far higher than it's ever been historically. You look at places like South Korea, Japan, all these countries, fine, they were more because of American aid, but they were also because of the Korean War. Japan and Germany, they always had that latent discipline of being industrial countries, even though they had gotten bombed out. They had that entrepreneurial culture. They had extremely high human development indicators. All that was needed was capital infusion, number one, and then markets. What happened was the Marshall Plan was very minor, actually. It provided only some of the basic capital. Most of it came from Korean War demand. The Korean War, even though it was horrible for Korea, was the best thing that happened to Germany and Japan, because that is what the German and Japanese economies were built on the back of the Korean War, right? Things like this. I mean, look, there's ultimately it comes down to this. The government doesn't need to listen to the left. The government doesn't need to listen to all these, discredited Congress ecosystem economists, so-called economists, and so-called journalists. But they're not even listening to the right. Okay, in the right, there's only room for people who keep saying Modi, 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 and invariably those advisors, the only thing they can say is Modi, 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 Modi. You go ask them, sir, what about fiscal policy? Modi, Modi, Modi. What about defense policy? Modi, Modi, Modi. I'm sorry, Modi, Modi, Modi is not defense policy. It's not fiscal policy. It's not agricultural policy. It's not human resource development policy. Right? uh, Vajpayee had a much better system. You could even criticize him to his face, and I mean, he had his own flaws. Different matter. Who doesn't have flaws? Find me a man or a woman who doesn't have flaws. This is just completely shutting out any other point of view, and it's basically there's a great. The only thing Modi seems to be successful at is winning elections, A, and B, hiring the worst person for the job. He has an uncanny knack of hiring horrible people. Best of luck to him.
No, I think the post-corona world is going to force many of the Indian policymakers to change course, because the reality is going to be much harsher than what they imagined so far.
I'm not so sure, Adi. You remember what happened during the nuclear tests when we were heavily sanctioned? That was also a golden opportunity to change policy. Nothing happened. We went through severe economic crises through the 50s, 60s, and 70s and the 80s. Did it change economic policy? No. The only time in India's history that we have ever properly changed economic policy was under Narasimha Rao.
Correct.
Which is why, it was the man. It wasn't the Indian impulse. It was the man. Even under crisis, a country with an acute inferiority complex like India doubles down on its mistakes. It doesn't correct the mistakes. It required a man of courage and vision like Narasimha Rao to change it. And, to a large extent, Vajpayee continued that work, even though he lost a golden opportunity to introduce the second wave of reforms in 1998 when the nuclear test sanctions happened. He should have done it. He did not, but still, he still managed the economy very, very well. It doesn't matter what's going to happen after this. We may even collapse. I personally think we're going to go into depression. But I do not see Modi having the capability to change course. It is uncharacteristic of him. He believes in dependence on the state. Okay. For him, he's quite literally your quintessential communist. He thinks because when you depend on the state, he is what Deng Xiaoping was after the Tiananmen Square. Before Tiananmen Square, China was a laissez-faire economy that created the middle class, which then came out on the streets of Tiananmen Square and got massacred. And Deng Xiaoping learned his lesson, which is why even today, 70 to 80% of demand in China is government demand. I think Modi is moving towards that model, but with none of the vision that Deng Xiaoping had.
I think anything controlled by the government either fails, rots, or collapses. That's a very straight view, American view, or whatever view you call it. It's commonsensical. The government has no business to stay in business. They have a business to manage the policies. That's it. And any government which provides a strong policy framework and protections under law, I mean, that country is going to succeed. It's a history, and it has seen over and over again. But Abhijit, it's always a pleasure to hear you and your deep insight, and also the passion that you bring to it. And I love passionate people who know what they're doing and who love what they're doing. Thank you, and we'll do one more session later on, maybe next time, and we'll touch upon your pet topics on the defense strategy, because that is also going to change in coming days. And since I have written many books on defense strategy, especially my second book, The Making of a Statesman, it's all about politics and statesmanship. So we'll discuss something in our next discussion. But till then, thank you so much, and keep quarantined as per whatever is happening right now.
Har Har Mahadev, and so sorry to your viewers for being so pessimistic. But I think I think everybody needs a reality check now that this government is fundamentally a failure. So sorry.
No, I'm this show I'm going to title as "Straight from the Mind,"
Yeah.
and with Abhijit.
With a
And
warning, very, very depressing content.
there's something sometimes we have to hear that, it's a wake up call.
Yeah.
And Straight from the Mind with Abhijit, second session after a couple of days. Thank you, Abhijit. And viewers, keep watching, subscribe, and just remember a disclaimer. While some of you have told me, I'm not a professional interviewer. I just discuss things with my friends and put it out. Thank you.